I never thought moving to Pine Ridge, Colorado would mean dealing with someone who'd literally try to steal the equipment keeping me alive on mountain roads. But here I was, staring at Brenda Patterson through my front door on a gray January morning while she demanded I hand over my snow chains. "Those chains are a community hazard," Brenda said, her highlighted blonde hair perfectly styled despite the freezing temperature. She wore a cream-colored wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and her manicured finger jabbed toward my garage. "The HOA bylaws clearly state that all automotive equipment stored visibly must meet aesthetic standards. Those chains are rusted and unsightly." I rubbed my eyes, still holding my coffee mug. "Brenda, it's 6:30 in the morning. And my snow chains are in my garage, which last I checked, isn't a public viewing area. Your garage door was open yesterday evening. Multiple residents complained about the appearance." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through what I assumed were messages. "The Maple Street Estates Homeowners Association takes neighborhood standards very seriously, Mr. Lawson. It's Scott, and I opened my garage for 10 minutes to grab my tools. 10 minutes is 10 minutes too long when you're displaying non-compliant equipment." She sniffed, her nose wrinkling like she'd smelled something rotten. "I'm here to confiscate them until you can prove they meet our standards or replace them with something more visually appropriate." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "You want to confiscate my snow chains?" "The ones I need to drive up Ponderosa Hill to get to work. In January. In Colorado, the HOA has the authority to temporarily remove any items that violate community standards. It's in Section 12, Paragraph 8 of your agreement." She held out her hand like I was actually going to give her my property. "I'll return them once you've submitted the proper paperwork and paid the fine." "What fine?" $250 for the violation, plus a $50 administrative fee for the confiscation and return process. The absurdity of the situation was almost impressive. I'd moved to Pine Ridge 6 months ago for a job at the regional hospital, working as an ER nurse. The hours were brutal, but the location was beautiful, nestled in the Rocky Mountains with actual seasons and clean air. The house was affordable, the neighborhood looked quiet, and I'd signed the HOA paperwork without reading it too carefully because I was exhausted from the move and just wanted to settle in. That had been my first mistake. My second mistake had been not recognizing the warning signs when Brenda introduced herself as the HOA president during my first week. She'd shown up with a basket of muffins and a 3-page list of friendly reminders about neighborhood rules. No cars in driveways overnight. No decorations except during approved holiday periods. No lawn ornaments except for approved styles. No exterior paint colors without written permission. The list went on and on. "I'm not giving you my snow chains, Brenda." Her expression hardened. "Then you'll be in violation of HOA regulations, and I'll have no choice but to issue additional fines. $50 per day until compliance is achieved. You can't seriously expect me to drive up Ponderosa Hill without chains. That road is a sheet of ice right now. I barely made it home last night, even with the chains on." "That's not the HOA's concern. Perhaps you should consider a different route." "There is no different route. It's the only road that leads to the hospital from this neighborhood." Brenda's smile was thin and cold. "Then I suggest you purchase new, more aesthetically pleasing chains and submit them for approval. I can have the board review your application in 2 to 3 weeks. 2 to 3 weeks. I have a shift tonight." Again, not the HOA's concern. She pulled out a formal-looking document from her designer purse. "This is your official notice of violation. You have 24 hours to surrender the chains or face escalating penalties. "Good morning, Mr. Lawson." She turned and walked down my driveway, her heels clicking against the concrete despite the patches of ice everywhere. I watched her climb into her pristine white Mercedes SUV, the kind with heated seats and all-wheel drive that probably cost $60,000. She drove away slowly like she owned every inch of the street. I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed. It was my neighbor, Tom Richardson, texting from next door. "Did the HOA queen just leave your place? Saw her car." I called him instead of texting back. Tom answered on the first ring. "She tried to confiscate my snow chains," I said. "Your what?" "My snow chains. The ones I need to drive to work. She says they're unsightly and violate HOA standards." Tom let out a long whistle. "Man, she's getting worse. Last month, she fined the Hendersons $300 because their kid's basketball hoop was 2 inches over the height limit. The month before that, she tried to make old Mrs. Chen remove her bird feeder because it attracted unauthorized wildlife. How is she still HOA president? Because she runs unopposed every year, and most people are too scared to challenge her. She's got this whole network of supporters who report violations to her. It's like living in a surveillance state, except the dictator wears Lululemon and drinks pumpkin spice lattes." I had to laugh despite my frustration. So what do I do, honestly? Ignore her. Most of her threats are just hot air. The HOA has some power, but she acts like she's running a military operation. Just don't give her the chains and see what happens. She said she'd fine me $50 a day. Yeah, she says a lot of things. Fight it if she actually tries. The county has an HOA dispute process. It's a pain, but it works. We talked for a few more minutes before I had to get ready for work. I took a long shower, got dressed in my scrubs, and packed my lunch. The whole time, Brenda's words echoed in my head. The entitlement, the absolute certainty that she had the right to control something as basic as my safety equipment. It was infuriating. When I got to my garage, I looked at the snow chains hanging on their hook. They were old, sure, a little rusty in spots, but they worked perfectly. I'd bought them from a guy in Denver who'd used them for years. They'd saved my life more than once on these mountain roads. I grabbed them and loaded them into my truck, then headed to work. Ponderosa Hill was exactly as bad as I'd expected. The road wound up through dense pine forest, climbing nearly 800 feet in less than 2 miles. In summer, it was gorgeous. In winter, it was treacherous. The county salted it sometimes, but ice formed faster than they could keep up with, especially on the shaded sections where the sun never quite reached. I stopped at the base of the hill and got out to put the chains on. The metal was cold enough to burn my fingers even through my gloves. I worked quickly, threading them through the tire treads and securing the fasteners. When I was done, I tested them, then climbed back into the truck. The chains made a rhythmic clicking sound as I drove, biting into the ice and giving me traction. Without them, I'd have been sliding backward within the first 100 yards. Even with them, I had to keep the truck in low gear and move carefully. Twice, I felt the back end start to slide, but the chains caught and held. I made it to the top and breathed a sigh of relief. The hospital was another 10 minutes down the road, on flat, well-maintained streets that the city kept clear. I removed the chains in the parking lot and headed inside. Work was the usual chaos. A kid with a broken arm from sledding, an elderly woman with chest pain, a guy who'd slipped on ice and possibly cracked his ribs. We were short-staffed because half the day shift had called in sick with the flu, so I barely had time to think about Brenda and her ridiculous demands. It wasn't until my break, around 3 in the afternoon, that I checked my phone and found 6 new emails from the Maple Street Estates HOA. The first was a formal repeat of the violation notice. The second was a reminder about the 24-hour deadline. The third was a document titled Understanding Your HOA Responsibilities. The fourth was a payment request for the initial fine. The fifth was a warning about the daily penalties. The sixth was a notice that my violation had been added to my permanent HOA record and would be considered during any future board decisions regarding my property. I deleted all of them and went back to work. When my shift ended at 7, it was fully dark outside and snowing again. Big, heavy flakes that stuck to everything and reduced visibility to maybe 50 feet. I put the chains back on in the parking lot, then started the drive home. Ponderosa Hill was worse going down than up. The fresh snow hid the ice underneath, and even with the chains, I had to ride the brake and keep the truck in first gear. It took me 20 minutes to descend what should have been a 5-minute drive. When I finally reached the bottom, I was sweating despite the cold. The neighborhood was quiet when I got home. Streetlights cast yellow pools on the snow-covered sidewalks. Most houses had their curtains drawn, warm light glowing from inside. I pulled into my driveway, parked in the garage, and removed the chains before closing the door. I just walked inside when someone knocked. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Brenda stood there with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, maybe 50, wearing a security guard uniform with a badge that said Maple Street Estates Community Patrol. "Mr. Lawson," Brenda said formally, "this is Officer Daniels from our community security team. I'm here to collect the snow chains as previously discussed." "We discussed nothing. You made demands and I declined." Officer Daniels is authorized to retrieve HOA property being illegally stored on community premises. I looked at the security guard. He looked uncomfortable. "Sir, I'm just here to help facilitate the HOA's property management duties. Those chains are my personal property, not HOA property. And they're in my garage on my land which I own." "Your land is subject to HOA covenants," Brenda said sharply, "which means the HOA has certain rights regarding property management and community standards. Show me where it says you can confiscate personal property." She pulled out a thick binder from her bag. It was labeled Maple Street Estates HOA Bylaws and Regulations. She flipped through pages, her finger running down lines of tiny text. "Here, Section 12, Paragraph 8. The HOA reserves the right to temporarily remove any items, equipment, or materials that violate community standards until such time as the violation is remedied." That's about lawn decorations and trash cans, not safety equipment. It says any items, equipment, or materials. That includes your chains. I was too tired for this. "Get off my property, Brenda, both of you. I'm not giving you anything." The security guard shifted nervously. "Sir, if you refuse to cooperate, the HOA can pursue legal action." "Then tell them to pursue it. I'll see them in court." Brenda's face flushed red. "You're making a serious mistake, Mr. Lawson. The HOA has extensive resources and legal precedent on our side. This will cost you far more than the initial fine." "I don't care. Those chains keep me safe on that hill, and I'm not handing them over to satisfy your power trip." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't personal. This is about maintaining the standards that make this community desirable and protect everyone's property values. It's January in Colorado and you want to take my snow chains. That's not about property values. That's about control." We stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Brenda turned to the security guard. "Document this refusal in your report. We'll proceed with legal action." They left, and I closed the door, my heart pounding. I wasn't a confrontational person by nature. I'd spent my whole nursing career de-escalating tense situations, calming angry patients, finding compromises. But something about Brenda pushed every button I had. The next morning, I woke to find an official-looking letter taped to my front door. It was from the HOA's lawyer, a firm in Denver, informing me that I was being fined $50 per day for my ongoing violation, and that the HOA was pursuing immediate legal action to enforce compliance. The letter included a court date 3 weeks away in county court. I called Tom again. "They're actually suing you," he said, sounding amazed, "over snow chains, apparently. That's insane. Even for Brenda, that's insane. Do you know a lawyer?" "Yeah, actually. My sister's husband does HOA law. Let me text you his number. His name's Marcus, and he's dealt with crazy HOA boards before." 20 minutes later, I was on the phone with Marcus Chen, explaining the situation. He listened without interrupting, then let out a long sigh. "Okay, so the good news is that she doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. Snow chains are safety equipment, and no HOA covenant can supersede safety requirements, especially when we're talking about the only route to your workplace. Colorado law is pretty clear about that. What's the bad news?" "The bad news is that fighting this will cost you time and money. HOA lawsuits are expensive, even when you win, and Brenda sounds like the type who'll drag this out just to make a point. So what do I do?" "Show up to court. Bring documentation about the road conditions. Get a statement from your employer about your work schedule and the necessity of the route, and I'll write up a response to their complaint. We'll file a motion to dismiss with prejudice and sue for harassment and frivolous litigation. That usually scares HOA boards into backing down. Usually. Well, sometimes you get a board president who's so convinced they're right that they'll burn down their own house to prove a point. But let's hope Brenda's not that type." I thanked him and hung up, feeling slightly better. At least I had a plan. The next 2 weeks were tense. Every day, I'd come home to find new violation notices and fine assessments. The daily $50 penalty was adding up, and the HOA was also hitting me with additional fines for refusing to cooperate with HOA officials and creating a hostile community environment. By my count, I was supposedly on the hook for over $2,000. I documented everything. I took photos of the chains, photos of Ponderosa Hill's condition, screenshots of weather reports showing ice and snow. I got a letter from my supervisor at the hospital confirming my schedule and the necessity of my route. I even drove up to the county road maintenance department and got a statement about how Ponderosa Hill was classified as a hazardous winter road requiring chains or four-wheel drive with appropriate equipment. Meanwhile, Brenda escalated her campaign. She started sending emails to all the neighbors about my ongoing violations and how my refusal to respect community standards was putting everyone's property values at risk. She posted about it on the neighborhood Facebook group. She even put up a notice on the community bulletin board at the mailbox station, complete with a photo of my house and a list of my supposed infractions. Some neighbors were supportive. Tom obviously had my back, and a few others reached out privately to say they thought Brenda was out of line. But others seemed to buy into her narrative. I started getting dirty looks at the mailbox. Someone left a note on my truck saying, "Respect the rules or leave." The stress was getting to me. I started having trouble sleeping, running through arguments in my head, imagining worst-case scenarios. What if I actually lost in court? What if the judge sided with the HOA? Could they really make me pay thousands of dollars in fines? Could they force a lien on my house? Marcus assured me that none of that would happen, but the anxiety was still there. Then, 3 days before the court date, everything changed. It was a Wednesday evening, and I'd just gotten home from a particularly brutal shift. Multi-vehicle accident on I-70, 5 patients, 2 critical. I was exhausted and covered in stress sweat despite the cold. I'd stopped at the base of Ponderosa Hill like always, put my chains on and made the careful climb home. I was in my kitchen, heating up leftover pizza when Tom called. "Dude, turn on Channel 7, right now." "What? Why?" "Just do it." I grabbed the remote and switched on the TV. The local news was on, showing aerial footage of a white Mercedes SUV that had slid off Ponderosa Hill and crashed into a massive pine tree. The front end was crumpled, and emergency vehicles surrounded the scene. "That's Brenda's car," Tom said over the phone. I stared at the screen. The news anchor was explaining that the driver had lost control while descending Ponderosa Hill during this evening's snowfall. The vehicle had slid on ice, gone off the road, and struck a tree. The driver had been transported to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. "She crashed on the hill." "Yep." And according to my wife, who heard it from Janet across the street, Brenda was trying to prove that the chains weren't necessary. She was going to drive up and down the hill without any traction equipment to show that you were just being difficult. I couldn't speak for a moment. The irony was almost too much to process. "Is she okay?" I finally asked. "Broken wrist, possible concussion, lots of bruises." "She's at your hospital, actually." Of course she was. Of course, Brenda Patterson was going to end up in my ER after crashing without the snow chains she'd been trying to steal from me. I told Tom I had to go and hung up. The news was still showing footage of the crash, interviewing county road workers about the dangerous conditions on Ponderosa Hill. One of them specifically mentioned that chains or four-wheel drive with proper winter tires were essential for that road in these conditions. My phone rang. It was the hospital. "Scott, it's Jennifer. I know you're off shift, but we're slammed. Any chance you can come in? We've got that MVA from the hill plus 2 more accidents from the highway, and we're down a nurse." "I'll be there in 30 minutes. I got back in my truck, put the chains on again, and drove to the hospital. When I arrived, the ER was chaos. Ambulance lights flashing outside, patients on gurneys in the hallways, doctors and nurses moving quickly between rooms. Jennifer grabbed me as soon as I walked in. "Thank God. Can you take Bay 4? MVA patient stable but needs monitoring and paperwork." "Who is it?" She checked her tablet. "Patterson, Brenda. 49-year-old female slid off Ponderosa Hill." Of course it was my patient." I took a deep breath and walked to Bay 4. Brenda was lying in the bed, her left wrist in a temporary splint, a bandage on her forehead, and a cervical collar around her neck. Her perfect hair was a mess, and her makeup was smeared. She looked small and vulnerable in the hospital gown, nothing like the imperious HOA president who'd been terrorizing me for weeks. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "You, Mrs. Patterson." "I'm Scott Lawson, and I'll be your nurse this evening. How are you feeling?" She turned her head away. "I want a different nurse. I'm afraid we're short-staffed tonight. I'm the nurse assigned to your care." I kept my voice professional and calm, the same tone I used with every difficult patient. "I need to check your vitals and ask you some questions. Are you experiencing any pain?" She didn't answer. "Mrs. Patterson, I know this is awkward, but I'm here to do my job. Whatever is happening outside this hospital doesn't matter right now. You're my patient, and I'm going to take care of you." "Okay." She finally looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before: fear. Not of me, but of the situation. She'd been in a serious accident, and the reality of that was probably just sinking in. "My wrist hurts," she said quietly, "and my head." Okay, let's get you some pain medication. On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is the pain? 7. Maybe 8. I documented her vitals, checked her pupils, made sure the cervical collar was properly positioned. I started in Roman 4 for pain medication and fluids. I asked her questions about the accident, about whether she'd lost consciousness, about any other symptoms she was experiencing. Through it all, she was subdued, almost meek. This wasn't the Brenda who'd shown up at my door demanding my property. This was just a middle-aged woman who'd been in a scary accident and was hurting and afraid. I treated her exactly how I'd treat any other patient, with compassion, competence, and professionalism. After about an hour, once her pain was under control and the doctor had reviewed her X-rays and CT scan, confirming that her wrist was fractured but her head injury was minor, Brenda finally spoke. "You must think I'm an idiot." I was checking her Roman 4 line. "I think you were in an accident." That's all. I was trying to prove a point about the chains. I thought if I could drive that hill without them, it would show that you were just being stubborn. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? I made it up fine, she continued. It was coming down that I lost control. The road was icier than I thought, and I tried to brake, but the car just kept sliding. I couldn't stop. I couldn't do anything. Ice is dangerous like that. It's unpredictable. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm going to drop the lawsuit. You don't have to make any decisions right now. You've been through a trauma." "No, I do. I've been acting like a tyrant and I know it. This whole thing with you, with the chains, it was ridiculous. I don't know. I get so focused on the rules and the standards that I forget why we have them in the first place. The HOA is supposed to make the neighborhood better, not make people's lives harder." I finished checking her Roman 4 and made a note in her chart. "Like I said, you don't have to think about this right now. Focus on healing. Will you accept my apology?" I looked at her. She seemed sincere, her eyes watery, her voice shaky. But I'd also been dealing with her threats and harassment for weeks. An apology in a hospital bed while she was vulnerable and medicated didn't erase all of that. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "But let's see what happens when you're feeling better and back to your normal life." She nodded slowly, understanding. I finished my shift at midnight. Brenda had been moved to a regular room for overnight observation, and another nurse had taken over her care. I drove home carefully, my chains clicking against the pavement, the irony of the whole situation not lost on me. The next morning, I woke to an email from Marcus Chen. "Just got notification that the HOA is dropping the lawsuit and all associated fines. No explanation given. I'm drafting a response to make sure this is fully settled and they can't come back later. Congratulations, you won." I felt a wave of relief so intense I had to sit down. It was over. The lawsuit, the fines, the harassment, all of it was done. But I wasn't naive enough to think this was really finished. Brenda might have apologized in a moment of vulnerability, but she was still the HOA president. She still had power in the neighborhood, and people like her didn't usually change their fundamental nature just because of one accident. I was proven right 3 days later when I found a new notice in my mailbox. This one wasn't from Brenda's personal email, but from the official HOA board account. It was a formal announcement of an emergency board meeting to discuss recent events and potential policy changes regarding safety equipment and winter vehicle requirements. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community center. All homeowners were encouraged to attend. I decided to go. If Brenda was going to try to spin this somehow or use the meeting to regain control of the narrative, I wanted to be there to defend myself. Tuesday evening came, cold and clear. The community center was a small building near the neighborhood entrance. usually used for birthday parties and book clubs. When I arrived at 7, the parking lot was nearly full. Apparently, everyone in Maple Street Estates wanted to see what would happen. Inside, rows of folding chairs faced a table at the front where Brenda sat with 4 other board members. Her wrist was in a bright blue cast, and she wore a turtleneck that probably hid bruises from the accident. She looked composed but tired, and she didn't make eye contact as I found a seat in the middle of the room. Tom was there, sitting near the back with his wife. He gave me a thumbs up. I recognized a few other neighbors, some friendly, some not. At exactly 7, Brenda called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is unusual timing for a board meeting, but recent events have made it clear that we need to address some concerns about our community policies." She went through the standard opening procedures, reviewing minutes from the last meeting, discussing the budget, addressing a complaint about holiday lights that were still up past the deadline. It was all painfully boring, and I could see people shifting restlessly in their seats. Finally, she reached the main topic. As many of you know, I was recently in an accident on Ponderosa Hill. I'm recovering well, and I want to thank everyone who sent well wishes. A few people murmured sympathetically. The accident has caused me to reflect on some of our HOA policies, particularly those regarding vehicle equipment and storage. It's come to my attention that our enforcement of aesthetic standards may have inadvertently conflicted with safety requirements for residents who need to travel on hazardous roads during winter months. I sat up straighter. Was she actually admitting she was wrong? After consulting with our legal counsel and reviewing Colorado state law regarding vehicle safety equipment, the board has decided to revise Section 12, Paragraph 8 of our bylaws. Effective immediately, snow chains, tire chains, and other winter safety equipment will be exempt from aesthetic standards requirements. Residents may store such equipment in garages or other appropriate locations without fear of violation notices or fines. There was a moment of silence, then scattered applause. Tom whooped from the back of the room. Brenda continued, her voice steady but her face slightly flushed. Additionally, the board recognizes that the enforcement actions taken against Mr. Scott Lawson regarding his snow chains were inappropriate and not in keeping with the spirit of our community. All fines and penalties assessed against Mr. Lawson are hereby formally rescinded and removed from his HOA record. We apologize for any distress this matter caused. More applause, louder this time. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me. I nodded, not sure what else to do. One of the other board members, an older man named George, raised his hand. "I'd like to add something, if I may." Brenda nodded stiffly. George stood. "I've been on this board for 6 years, and I've watched our HOA go from a community organization to something that feels more like a police state. We've lost sight of what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be helping each other, maintaining property values through reasonable standards, and creating a pleasant place to live. We're not supposed to be harassing our neighbors over minor issues or trying to confiscate personal property." He looked directly at Brenda. "I've appreciated your dedication as president, Brenda, but I think it's time for a change in leadership. I'm formally nominating myself for HOA president, and I'll be running in the next election. I think we need to refocus on what matters and stop treating every little thing like a violation." The room erupted in conversation. Brenda's face went pale, then red. "The nomination period doesn't open until March," she said tightly. "I'm aware. I'm announcing my intention to run. I wanted everyone here to know that there will be a choice this year." Several people started clapping. Others joined in. Within seconds, most of the room was applauding George's announcement. Brenda tried to regain control of the meeting, but the energy had shifted. People started raising hands, asking questions, voicing complaints about HOA policies. Someone brought up the Henderson family's basketball hoop fine. Someone else mentioned Mrs. Chen's bird feeder. A younger couple talked about getting threatened with violations because their teenage son's car was too old and unsightly to park in the driveway. It became clear that Brenda's reign of terror had affected far more people than I'd realized. The accident and the lawsuit against me had apparently been the final straw for a lot of residents who'd been quietly suffering under her enforcement of petty rules. The meeting lasted another hour, with George and the other board members trying to address concerns and promise reforms. Brenda sat silently, her jaw clenched, her good hand gripping the edge of the table. When it finally ended, people clustered in small groups, talking excitedly. I stood to leave, ready to go home and put this whole mess behind me. Scott. It was Brenda, standing alone near the front table. Everyone else had moved away from her. I walked over. Yes, I meant what I said in the hospital. I'm sorry. I heard your apology to the board. That was good. That was political. This is personal. She looked down at her cast. I could have died on that hill. If I'd hit that tree at a different angle, or if the airbag hadn't deployed right, or if it had taken longer for someone to find me, I could have died. And it would have been because I was too stubborn and too proud to admit I was wrong about something as basic as safety equipment. I didn't know what to say to that. I've been HOA president for 8 years, she continued. In the beginning, I really did want to help the neighborhood. I wanted to maintain standards, protect everyone's investments, create a nice place to live. But somewhere along the way, I started caring more about the rules than the people. I started seeing every little thing as a violation that needed to be corrected. I forgot that we're all just neighbors trying to live our lives. So what are you going to do? I'm not running for re-election. George will make a good president. He actually cares about people. She looked up at me, and I'm going to try to be a better neighbor. Starting with leaving you alone about your snow chains. I almost smiled. I appreciate that. For what it's worth, I'm glad you didn't give them to me. You were right to stand your ground. We stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then Brenda nodded and walked away, her heels clicking softly on the tile floor. I watched her leave, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sympathy. She was dealing with the consequences of her own actions, but she was also clearly struggling with the realization of how far she'd gone. Tom caught up with me in the parking lot. That was wild. Did she actually apologize to you? Yeah, I think she means it. Do you forgive her? I thought about it. I don't know yet, but I'm willing to move on. The next few weeks were remarkably peaceful. No violation notices appeared on my door. No threatening emails filled my inbox. The neighborhood Facebook group calmed down, with people actually posting about normal things like garage sales and lost pets instead of HOA enforcement actions. Brenda kept a low profile. I'd see her occasionally, getting her mail or leaving for work, but we didn't interact beyond brief waves. She seemed diminished somehow, like the accident had taken something from her beyond just her confidence on the road. George turned out to be a good board member. He organized a town hall meeting where residents could voice concerns and suggestions without fear of retaliation. He established a committee to review the HOA bylaws and recommend changes to eliminate overly restrictive or unclear policies. He even started a neighborhood newsletter that focused on community events and helpful information, rather than violation warnings. The election in March was a landslide. George won with 78% of the vote. Brenda didn't run, as promised. She showed up to the meeting where the results were announced, sitting in the back row, and she was one of the first people to congratulate George when he won. Life returned to normal, or as normal as life in an HOA neighborhood could be. I continued working my shifts, driving up and down Ponderosa Hill with my snow chains, grateful for the traction they provided. Every time I put them on, I thought about how close I'd come to losing them, how close Brenda had come to literally taking away the equipment that kept me safe. It wasn't until late March, as the snow started to melt and spring began creeping into the mountains, that I had my final interaction with Brenda. I was outside washing my truck on a Saturday morning when she walked over from across the street. She was carrying a small box wrapped in simple brown paper. "Hi, Scott." "Hi, Brenda. How's the wrist? Healing well?" "The cast comes off next week." She held out the box. "I wanted to give you this. It's not much, but it felt appropriate." I took the box, curious. Inside was a brand new set of snow chains, heavy-duty ones made of thick steel with reinforced links. They probably cost $200 or more. "Brenda, you didn't have to do this." "I know, but I wanted to. Your old chains work fine, but these are better, stronger. They'll last longer." She smiled slightly. "And they're not rusty, so they meet aesthetic standards." I actually laughed. "Thank you, really." "You're welcome. And Scott, thank you for taking care of me that night in the hospital. You didn't have to be kind, given everything I'd put you through, but you were." That meant a lot. That's just the job. Every patient deserves good care. It's more than the job, it's who you are. She turned to leave, then paused. "I've been thinking a lot about second chances lately. About how we all mess up sometimes, and how important it is to have people who are willing to let us try to be better. So, thank you for that too." She walked back across the street, and I stood there holding the box of new chains, feeling like maybe this whole ridiculous situation had somehow led to something positive after all. The rest of spring passed quietly. Summer came, bringing warm weather and long days. Ponderosa Hill transformed from a treacherous ice sheet to a beautiful mountain road lined with wildflowers. I didn't need the chains anymore, but I kept both sets in my garage, the old rusty ones and the new ones Brenda had given me, side by side on their hooks. George turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He focused on actual community issues like organizing road repairs, arranging for better snow removal services, and planning neighborhood events. The 4th of July block party was the best the neighborhood had seen in years, with everyone contributing food and actually enjoying each other's company, instead of worrying about violation notices. Brenda became just another neighbor. She served on the community events committee, helping to organize the block party and a fall festival. She was quieter than before, less aggressive, more willing to listen. People slowly began to forgive her, though some remained wary. As for me, I settled into life in Pine Ridge. The job at the hospital continued to be challenging and rewarding. The house became more of a home as I made friends in the neighborhood and learned the rhythms of mountain living. I even started dating someone I met at a hospital fundraiser, a teacher named Amanda Davidson who thought the whole snow chain story was hilarious. So this woman literally tried to steal your safety equipment and then crashed without it. Amanda said one evening over dinner, "That's like something out of a movie." It was surreal. The whole thing felt like I was living in some kind of bizarre reality show. What did you learn from it? I thought about that. I learned that sometimes standing your ground is important, even when it's uncomfortable. I learned that HOA agreements should actually be read before you sign them. And I learned that people can change, but only if they want to and only if there's a reason serious enough to make them look at themselves honestly. Did Brenda really change? I think so. At least, she's trying. That's more than a lot of people do. By the time winter rolled around again, I was ready for it. I had both sets of chains, a truck with new winter tires, and a healthy respect for Ponderosa Hill's treacherous conditions. The first time I put the chains on that season, I remembered everything that had happened the previous year. The confrontations, the lawsuit, the accident, the slow path toward resolution. I also thought about how a simple thing like snow chains had become a metaphor for something larger. Brenda had seen them as a violation of her vision of how the neighborhood should look, a challenge to her authority, something that needed to be controlled and corrected. I'd seen them as essential safety equipment, a basic necessity, something worth fighting for. In the end, we were both right and both wrong. The chains were both things, a practical tool and a symbol of the tension between individual needs and community standards. What mattered was finding the balance, recognizing that rules should serve people, not the other way around. One evening in December, almost exactly a year after the whole mess had started, I was driving home from a late shift when I saw a car pulled over at the base of Ponderosa Hill. It was a small sedan, clearly struggling on the icy road, its wheels spinning uselessly as it tried to gain traction. I pulled over and got out. The driver was a young guy, maybe mid-20s, looking frustrated and scared. "You okay?" I asked. "I can't get up the hill. I've tried 3 times and I keep sliding back down. You need chains. The ice is too bad tonight for regular tires." "I don't have chains. I just moved here last month and I didn't think I'd need them." I looked at the hill, at the spinning wheels of his car, at the expression on his face. I thought about Brenda crashing without chains, about how that could have been anyone, about how sometimes we all need help. "Wait here," I said. I went back to my truck and grabbed the old rusty chains, the ones that had started this whole mess. "Here, you can borrow these. Just get home safe and drop them off tomorrow. I live in Maple Street Estates, number 42. His face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Are you sure?" "I can buy some tomorrow and bring those back instead. These will work fine for tonight. Just be careful and take it slow." I helped him put the chains on, showed him how to secure them properly, and watched as he carefully made his way up the hill, the chains giving him the traction he needed. When he reached the top safely, I got back in my own truck, put on my new chains, and followed him up. When I got home, I sat in my driveway for a minute, engine idling, thinking about how strange life could be. A year ago, those chains had nearly cost me thousands of dollars and created months of stress and conflict. Tonight, they'd helped a stranger get home safely. Same chains, completely different context, entirely different meaning. That, I realized, was the real lesson. Things aren't inherently good or bad, violations or necessities, problems or solutions. Context matters. Perspective matters. And maybe most importantly, being willing to help each other matters more than any rule or regulation ever could. I went inside, made some dinner, and settled in for the evening. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the neighborhood in fresh white powder, making everything look clean and new and full of possibility. The chains hung in my garage, ready for the next time I'd need them. No longer a source of conflict, but simply tools that served their purpose. And somewhere across the neighborhood, Brenda Patterson was probably sitting in her house, warm and safe, hopefully having learned the same lessons I had about what really mattered in life. Not perfect lawns or matching mailboxes or rust-free equipment, but safety and community and the willingness to admit when you're wrong. The next morning, the young guy from the hill showed up at my door right on time, returning the chains with profuse thanks and a gift card to a local coffee shop. I accepted both graciously, hung the chains back on their hook, and went about my day. Life in Maple Street Estates continued, quieter now, more peaceful, with an HOA that actually functioned the way it was supposed to, facilitating community, maintaining reasonable standards, and supporting neighbors rather than terrorizing them. George proved to be a steady, sensible leader who understood that being president of an HOA wasn't about power or control, but about service and common sense. As for the snow chains, they remained in my garage through that winter and many winters after, serving their purpose without drama or conflict. Every time I used them, I was reminded of that strange period when something so simple had become so complicated, and how sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal what really matters. The story could have ended tragically, with Brenda seriously injured or worse, with lawsuits dragging on for years, with a neighborhood torn apart by conflict. Instead, it ended the way most real stories do, with imperfect people trying to do better, with lessons learned the hard way, and with life simply continuing in all its messy, complicated, beautiful normalcy. And that really was enough. More than enough. It was everything.